And to details. President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi returned home on Tuesday after attending the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza and holding bilateral ties with a number of world leaders. Addressing the summit, President el-Sisi accused Israel of being directly responsible for the unprecedented humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip and called for the occupation entity to immediately end its brutal war on the besieged Strip and for the international community to shoulder its responsibility to save Gaza. The details.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi stressed on Tuesday that the Israeli occupation is directly responsible for the unprecedented humanitarian crisis in the Gaza Strip and the suffering of its people as a deliberate outcome of a destructive and revenge war on the besieged territory, its infrastructure and medical system. Speaking at the Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza conference in Jordan, President el-Sisi said such war is using the weapon of famine and siege as well as the forced displacement without any respect for international charters or humanitarian ethical principles. The head of state welcomed a UN resolution calling for a ceasefire in Gaza and called on Israel to end its siege there and further called on border crossings must be opened. The president noted that Egypt had warned several times of dangers resulted from the Israeli war on Gaza, as well as the fatal consequences of the Israeli military operation in Palestinian Rafah, which hinders the flow in of the humanitarian aid into Gaza that depended on the Rafah crossing. He called for international collaborating efforts to save Gaza and reach an immediate and permanent ceasefire, as well as freeing all hostages and detainees, in addition to protecting civilians, plus not targeting neither the infrastructure nor UN employees or workers of both medical and services sectors. President el-Sisi also noted that there should be a financial support to the UNRWA agency in order to carry out its vital and crucial role, as well as a guarantee of the flow in and distribution of the humanitarian aid in Gaza and immediate return of the displaced Palestinians to their land. Earlier in the day, President el-Sisi held talks with Jordan's King Abdullah II, which tackled the latest developments in Gaza and efforts to reach a ceasefire and protect civilians in the territory. The two leaders reviewed means of reaching a settlement for the Palestinian cause according to a two-state solution. Jordan's King Abdullah II inaugurated the Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza Summit in the Dead Sea on Tuesday. King Abdullah II said a coordination mechanism bringing together all parties in Gaza must be reached, stressing that the situation in Jerusalem and the West Bank was at its worst under continued Israeli aggression.
President el-Sisi held a series of bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza. More details in the following report.
President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi held a number of bilateral meetings on the sidelines of the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza on Tuesday. President el-Sisi held a meeting with the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, during which the President affirmed Egypt's firm stance in supporting the Palestinian cause and its keenness to support efforts of the Palestinian National Authority to preserve the rights and capabilities of the Palestinian people, especially their legitimate right to their independent state on the 1967 borders with East Jerusalem as its capital. The presidential spokesman added that the meeting had discussed its developments in joint efforts to halt the war in Gaza, implement humanitarian aid completely and sustainably. For his part, the Palestinian leader expressed his appreciation for Egypt's support and stance in support of the Palestinian people, appreciating the efforts of the Egyptian leadership on preserving the Palestinian cause and preventing liquidation. President el-Sisi also held talks with his Rwandan counterpart, Paul Kagame, during which they probed the latest efforts to reach a ceasefire deal in Gaza and bilateral ties. Also, President el-Sisi held talks with President of the European Council, Charles Michel. The two sides probed deep and strong bilateral ties binding the two sides, as well as their partnership, especially after raising ties to a strategic and comprehensive partnership recently, which in turn broadens means of enhancing ties in light of the two sides' interests. Meanwhile, the head of state held another meeting with Slovenian Prime Minister Robert Golob, during which they reviewed bilateral relations at all levels, especially the economic and investment ones. They also reviewed the situation in Gaza, with President Sisi hailing Slovenia's stances and efforts in its recognition of the Palestinian state. The president called on continuing international efforts to apply a two-state solution, reach a ceasefire in Gaza, and exchange hostages and detainees. Meanwhile, President Sisi also met with Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez, as the meeting witnessed hailing of the distinguished bilateral relations in various domains. Presidential spokesman added that President Sisi praised Spain's supporting stance to the Palestinian cause, highlighting Spain's historical recognition of the Palestinian state and its importance to support the international efforts to apply a two-state solution.
UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres addressed the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza on Tuesday. Guterres warned that the health situation in Gaza's hospitals is deteriorating and said aid arriving to Gaza was not enough to cover its humanitarian needs. The UN chief noted that 80% of Gaza's population lacks access to clean water due to the war and aid cutting. He called upon all warring parties in Gaza to abide by international humanitarian law and stressed that Gaza aid must be allowed in safety and sufficiently. Guterres appealed to the world to stand united to safeguard UNRWA in the face of outrageous and relentless attacks. He stressed that the horror in Gaza must stop and that the speed and scale of the carnage, adding that killing in Gaza was beyond anything in his years as Secretary General. Also, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas addressed the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza on Tuesday. Abbas said the Palestinian people in Gaza have been facing savage crimes and starvation for over 8 months. He called on the international community to pressure the Israelis to stop the siege on Gaza and open border crossings to allow humanitarian aid. The Palestinian leaders further called for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza. The conference was being held upon a joint call by President el-Sisi, Jordan's monarch, and UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres in the Dead Sea in Jordan. It is aimed at garnering the support of the international community for humanitarian aid to Gaza in collaboration with a number of presidents, governments and international aid agencies. The conference tackled the humanitarian angle regarding allowing aid into the Gaza Strip and how to deal with the humanitarian crisis civilians are facing there. It also discussed support for UN humanitarian organizations, especially UNRWA and other agencies working in the humanitarian field and concerned with receiving, delivering and distributing aid in the Strip. Foreign Minister Sameh Shoukry held a joint press conference with his Jordanian counterpart and the deputy of the UN Chief for Humanitarian Affairs at the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza. Earlier, Shoukry participated in 3 workshops held ahead of the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza. The top diplomat asserted that since the start of the war in Gaza, Egypt has delivered more than 94,000 tons of humanitarian aid to the Strip, provided health care to more than 85,000 Palestinians and helped evacuate more than 74,000 citizens of foreign and dual nationalities. The conference was held in Jordan under a joint Egyptian, Jordanian and international initiative. It tackled the humanitarian angle regarding allowing aid into the Gaza Strip and how to deal with the humanitarian crisis civilians are facing there. It also discussed support for the UN humanitarian organizations, especially UNRWA and other agencies working in the humanitarian field and concerned with receiving, delivering aid, distributing aid in the besieged Strip. The United States on Tuesday promised more than $400 million in new aid for the Palestinians at the International Conference for Urgent Humanitarian Response for Gaza, where world leaders backed a U.S. push for a ceasefire as the only ultimate solution to help war-ravaged Gaza. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken promised $404 million for food, drinking water, health supplies and other aid to the Palestinians. He noted that a UN appeal for the Palestinians was only one-third funded, with a shortfall of some $2.3 billion. The U.S. top diplomat called on countries to press Hamas to accept the ceasefire proposal laid out on May 31st by President Joe Biden, saying that Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu assured him of support. Blinken did not specify how the United States would deliver the assistance, but Washington has focused on the World Food Programme and private aid groups. And Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez announced another 60 million euros in assistance to Gaza, praised the U.S. diplomatic efforts for a ceasefire and called on Hamas and Israel to act in a responsible manner and seize the new opportunity in front of them. Cairo welcomed UN Security Council decision backing a deal over a comprehensive and permanent ceasefire in Gaza. A foreign ministry in a statement welcomed a hostage swap deal and a full retreat of Israeli forces from Gaza. The statement reiterated calls for Israel to abide by commitments to the international community's rules and to stop the war on Gaza. U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken said on Tuesday a Hamas statement of support for a UN resolution backing a proposal for a ceasefire in the Gaza war was a hopeful sign, though word from Hamas leadership in the enclave was vital. Earlier, Blinken met Israeli officials on Tuesday in a concerted push to end the 8-month-old war, a day after President Joe Biden's proposal for a ceasefire was approved by the UN Security Council. Ahead of Blinken's trip, Israel and Hamas both repeated hardline positions that have undermined previous mediation to end the fighting, while Israel has pressed on with assaults in central and southern Gaza, among the bloodiest of the war. Arab League chief Ahmed Abul Ghait welcomed the decision by the UN Security Council in support of a U.S. draft decision for a ceasefire in Gaza. Abul Ghait said on his social media account that the Council has been too late in shouldering its responsibilities, which opened the way for mass killings of Palestinians. He said the Israeli aggression in Gaza must be immediately stopped.